It's a privilege to have a returning guest, Admiral James Stavridis. You know him from Morning Joe. You know him from a lot of places. He was the Supreme Allied Commander at NATO and previously commanded the U.S. Southern Command. He's received over 50 medals. He's published 13 other books in addition to his new book that's out. We're going to talk a lot about The Restless Wave, a novel of the United States Navy. Welcome, sir. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. And my wingman, or I would say in the Navy, my shipmate on Morning Joe. It's great to be on with you.
So we got a lot to talk about. What was really kind of chilling to me was a recent piece you wrote for Bloomberg about people talk about a regional war in the Middle East. And you kind of really, and we just use those words and nobody gives much, nobody does. We don't necessarily think it through what that really means. Give me the highlights of that piece, because it was, you kind of go, wow, this really can't happen. The collateral damage would be stunning.
It would. And my definition of a regional war is Israel and Iran go full tilt, all of their armed forces engaged. So now they would be fighting in cyberspace. They would be launching ballistic missiles at each other to include population centers. They would, without question, on the Iranian side, close the Strait of Hormuz. There goes 30% of the world's oil until we can fight to reopen it. The Israelis, God forbid, might be tempted in extremis to use a nuclear weapon. They are allegedly a nuclear power. They don't admit it. It would also include constant airstrikes back and forth and the use of proxies for targeted assassinations in both Israel itself as well as against the Iranians. The short answer is you ain't seen nothing yet in terms of what full-on combat between those two nations would look like. Two final quick thoughts. One, almost certainly the United States would get drawn into it, if only on the heavy defensive side with anti-missile systems. But I think probably at sea against the Iranian Navy would be fighting to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, would probably use this opportunity to go big at the Houthis down in Yemen. So look for the U.S. to be dragged in. And here's the punchline. I'd say the chances right now of us stumbling into that level of conflict are about 1 in 4, Donny.
Wow, that's frightening. So give me the outcome of that. You really war game it out. You get into a lot of specifics, and I'd love to go there. But war game it out. How does it end if this 25% chance happens?
It ends with tens of thousands killed, probably 100,000 plus grievously wounded. These are totals incorporating both what Israel would lose and Iran would lose. It would also just crack the global economy because of that oil being bottled up for some period of time. And, the global economy is a big machine. It would overcome this. Ultimately, it would inculcate the fact that there was a massive war, but very hard to see that happening quickly. So my war game says massive casualties, destruction to significant chunks of infrastructure in both countries, and frankly, the global economy, if you will, taking a pause, leading to almost certainly a global recession before we could kind of get the machine up and running again.
Now, Iran, you always hear they're days or weeks away from having nuclear capabilities. What would be the reason for Israel to either go in and take it out or not take it out? Because there's a simplistic thinking that goes, well, you can't let them have a nuclear weapon. So why right now they've got momentum? They seem to have Iran's proxies on their heels. Why would they not go in and take out the nuclear weapons?
Yeah, it's an arguable proposition. I'll take the other side of the argument and say now is not the time to do it. I'll give you 3 quick reasons. One is Iran, yes, is, let's call it 2 months away from producing some form of a primitive atomic weapon, but they're at least a year away, Donny, from having the means to deliver it. Okay. So there's no immediate pressing, hey, they've got the bomb reason to go after it. Number two, it's a really hard target set. People say, oh yeah, snap my fingers, we'll take out the Iranian nuclear program. Hey, good luck with that calculus. I say that as a military officer. Iran, newsflash, is 3 times the size of Texas. It's a huge country. Population, by the way, about 90 million. Huge country. And in that 3 times the size of Texas land space, they've got at least 25 sites, probably another dozen we don't know about. It's where they have embedded their highest end air defense supplied by your friends, the Russians. And punchline here, a great deal of it is buried 30 stories down and not under sand or dirt. It's under concrete. It's in concrete and granite, natural granite, both. So very tough target set. So reason number two, it's going to be a huge expenditure of resources. And frankly, as a military analyst, I'm not certain Israel by itself, without the United States, could amp up the level of attack. And third and finally, there's really good alternative targets to go after here. You could go after the oil and energy sector. Wouldn't recommend that because it kind of cracks the global economy, and that'll upset a lot of people about Israel, although the world is pretty upset right now anyway. But I think where you want to land here is not the energy sector, not the nuclear sector, but in the middle are a ton of excellent targets just waiting, as we say in the military business, waiting to be serviced, meaning military industrial complex, factories that build ballistic missiles, command and control networks, air defense nodes, plenty of good targets within the capabilities of the Israeli Air Force. If I were an Israeli general, that's what I'd be recommending to Bibi Netanyahu.
Speaking of Bibi, from my point of view, despite all the politics on all sides, the United States has let Israel do what it needs to do or what it is doing, with the exception of the quote unquote 2,000-pound bombs. What was that a kind of just a nod to part of your political base or was that really something that restrained the Israelis?
The Israelis have workarounds to those bombs. The bad news for the recipients of the bombs, the targets, if you will, if Israel doesn't have those precision-guided 2,000-pound bombs, and that sounds, of course, like kind of an oxymoron,
yeah,
but they really are precise compared to what you would be using if you didn't have the high-end guidance system that's strapped on the nose of those 2,000-pound bombs. So it's a real military decrement, but Israel's workaround, if they simply are closed out of that from the United States, the workaround will be to use big bombs that are less accurate. That'll mean more collateral damage. So for U.S. decision makers, it's a very tough call.
So right now, you've talked about the perils and all-out regional war between Iran and Israel. Play this out the other way, that it doesn't come to that. Right now, we've got Hezbollah shooting rockets in. We've still got the Gaza. We've got the Houthis. How does this? I keep saying this seems to be a Rubik's Cube where I don't know how this ends.
I don't think anybody knows how this ends. I will certainly sketch for you the 3 out of 4 chance. So let's not talk ourselves into an apocalyptic scenario here. 1 in 4, we have a big war. 3 and 4, we don't. And the reason we don't is Iran really doesn't want a big war right now. Most Israeli senior leaders also feel as though their hands are kind of full between Hamas, Hezbollah, plinking away at the Houthis, sending missiles off to Tehran. They got a lot going on. So neither side ultimately is looking for that all-out war. So there's a built-in kind of motivated restraint on both sides from going to the big dance, if you will. On the other hand, certainly there can be miscalculations. That's how World War I started, with an assassination in the Balkans. And 4 years later, the Ottoman Empire is gone, the Russian Empire is gone, the German Empire is gone, and the good old Austro-Hungarian Empire are gone. So there can be miscalculations. Let's park on the 3 of 4. I think how you could stabilize within that framework is peacekeeping force in Gaza. You're going to have to negotiate with the Israelis. Forget Hamas. They're not worth negotiating with at this point. They're a spent force. But
are they completely decimated? You know, there's the words we have to destroy Hamas. Has Hamas ostensibly been destroyed?
Yes, in terms of its fighting capability. Certainly as an ideology, it'll be a dead man walking for a while, like Yahya Sinwar, in my view, is and should be a dead man walking. You don't negotiate with somebody like that. What Israel has to do militarily, the final center of gravity are those tunnels. They need to decommission the tunnel system, 400 miles. They're in the process of doing it. Over 2 to 4 months, they'll be done with the tunnels. Then you can bring in probably an Arab peacekeeping force, maybe led by the Saudis. That would be a good thing strategically. And that kind of takes care of Gaza for the moment. Up north, the Israelis are not going to occupy Lebanon. They're not going to try to kick Hezbollah out the way they have effectively broken Hamas, but they really want to degrade the missiles. You know, and for Hamas, it's the tunnels. For Hezbollah, it's the missiles. You want to go after those stockpiles of arguably about 130,000 missiles, probably down to about 90,000 by now, by the way. But that's what Israel is doing right now. And I think in, again, 2 to 4 months, they'll get through the smaller tunnel complex there. They'll knock down the inventories. At that stage of things, they might, the Israelis, be willing to accept a beefed up, better led UN force, which has been completely incompetent on that border, but a new UN peacekeeping force. Then they can get their settlers back in play. And third and finally, at that point, it's all guns blazing at the Houthis, who, by the way, have knocked out about half of the traffic through the Suez Canal. They're doing real damage to the global economy. And sooner or later, we, the big we, are going to have to deal with the Houthis. In that scenario, Iran's proxies are killed off. And the tentacles of the octopus, an image the Israelis like a lot, the tentacles have been cut off, and you can kind of isolate the head. And the final piece of all this, Donny, is you construct an agreement, and we were about to do this just over a year ago. You construct an agreement where the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia recognizes the Israelis, and we put together a kind of a U.S., Israeli, Saudi, Arab agreement on security. I think that's attainable, whether it's Team Harris or Team Trump that comes in. Both sides ought to be looking for that as a final outcome. That's how you could stabilize the region.
Do you see a dramatic difference in Middle East policy between the two candidates?
Yes, I do. I think Team Trump will come in very strongly in favor of Israel, very supportive of Bibi Netanyahu. I think they will also come in extremely supportive of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. As we all know, there are significant financial ties between Trump family, as in Jared, and the kingdom. The kingdom are big investors in Jared's fund.
Yes,
so they're going to come in high and hard, Israel, Arab world, trying to push them together. I think over on Team Harris, you're probably going to get some new players in there. You know, Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken, Lloyd Austin. That's a crew that looks pretty tired to me. Right. They're all friends of mine. I'd tell them, hey, time to take a break, get some fresh horses. But I think the approach will probably be roughly what I described. Get to a peacekeeping force in Gaza, get to a stable northern front, go after the Houthis aggressively, but a much more nuanced approach that balances the needs, aspirations of the Palestinian people, and, you know, dare I say those freighted words, a two-state solution. That would at least be a conversation over here with Team Harris. Team Trump, not interested.
Yeah. Let's get to the book. The Restless Wave, a novel of the United States Navy. Interesting literary technique. You take a fictional character who kind of you lens everything through, and he's interacting with real historical figures. let's talk about the book.
Yeah, that's the fun part of writing historical fiction is exactly what you say. You really get to throw some paint on the canvas. So the book starts in the late 1930s in Key West. This protagonist, young man, is kind of at loose ends trying to decide what to do, and he becomes a deckhand on the boat of Ernest Hemingway. And so you get a really fun characterization of Hemingway. You know, Hemingway's not a central character, but he's just an interesting part of local color. So now our protagonist goes off to the Naval Academy. He's there for 4 years, has some mistakes, some flaws, an ill-fated romance. He's in the middle of a cheating scandal. These are all very real aspects of life in the military in the late 30s and early 40s. And I set it up, Donny, to kind of make the point, you know, we think about correctly about the greatest generation, how great they are. You know, they're heroic. They're not self-minded. They want to come together and fight for the country after the war. But we tend to forget they were young. They were flawed. They made mistakes. You know, George Bush, I think a very strong president, a very strong leader, looking back on his time as a Navy pilot in World War II, he said, these are great words. Listen, he said, I was scared, but I was willing. I was young, but I was ready. I had barely begun to live when I started to see men die. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And it talks to these flaws. And in the book, The Restless Wave.
They're kids. You forget these are kids.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly. And that's a big point in The Restless Wave is how young and flawed and unformed this generation is. Yet, as the book unfolds, they step into the inferno of World War II in the Pacific. That's the arc of the story. And along the way, there's a very steamy love triangle in Pearl Harbor with a young woman who's a surfer and a graduate student at University of Hawaii. And there's a Marine and a Navy guy fighting over her. And then they go off to war and crazy things happen, real things happen. All of it constructed, Donny, out of letters, memoirs. Everything in the book is factual. And it takes you through some pretty profound combat as well as some pretty profound love stories. It's really a novel of love and war.
It is. It's the protagonist in the arc is really what the country's arc was. Entering the war, and seeing through the lens. Fantastic. Where do you get?
Can I tell you one before you get to that? Let me just tell you one other thing about the book. The Easter egg inside the book. You have to look closely for the little footprints. Is that it's loosely based on Dante's Inferno.
Yes.
About the idea of descending into the circles of hell and that you have to go through that in order to achieve ultimately paradise in the Divine Comedy by Dante. So there's a nice literary backstory in there that is kind of fun too.
I want to talk about fear. You've obviously commanded men. You've been in combat. How much does fear play a part in fighting, good and bad?
It's extremely real. I remember myself as a 20-something operations officer, third in command on a Navy cruiser in the 1980s. And we were fighting the Iranians, literally in combat with the Iranians. And I was young and scared. I had a captain who was seated next to me in the command center on our cruiser, who had a very calming effect. And I learned a lot watching him about a leader's responsibility to understand when combat begins or tension in a boardroom or in a studio, all eyes are on the leader. And that was a lesson that has stayed with me. Final thought about fear in combat and on a battlefield and in any tense situation. The opposite of fear is not courage, the Greeks say. The opposite of fear is love. It's love for your fellow sailors, the men and women to the right and to the left in combat. That's where your mind goes. How can I be part of this machine that needs to be bigger than one person? And that helps calm, the love between people on a battlefield, on a ship, on a team, anywhere undergoing extreme stress. The opposite of fear is not courage, it's love.
I love that. Talk to me about the Mosaic of Scott Bradley James, how you put him together, how you conceived him. I always wonder when you have these incredible characters, like, tell me the birth of that young man.
Thank you. It is a mosaic. And I think most writers of fiction will tell you, well, you take a chunk here, a chunk there. Part of it is my own experience, and certainly part of it as the ideas of being young and making mistakes. And I certainly did in my 20s. I'd invite any listener to imagine themselves in their 20s. I bet you made some mistakes. Even you, Donny, might have made some mistakes.
Yeah, a few here and there, yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a chunk of me in there. Certainly, I went to the Naval Academy. I served in surface combatants. I've seen combat. There's a second chunk that flows through, as I mentioned earlier, from memoirs, stories that I read over the year or two as I was working on the book. I would often see a story about some veteran. I'd tear it out. A lot of it is very factually based in that sense. And then thirdly, the backdrop of it is really the big sweeping history. You alluded to it a moment ago. This is a huge part of our national story. You know, you, among all my friends, really understand the power of storytelling, and self-talk matters, what we say about ourselves, what we think about ourselves. So yeah, I went back and read classics like The Winds of War by Herman Wouk, a bigger, longer book stop of a novel. But I tried to capture that sweep, that national level, alongside the tactical incidents and my own experience. That's where this character comes from.
Admiral James Stavridis, a scholar, a gentleman, an American hero. The book is The Restless Wave. I so appreciate your time. I am a huge fan, and it's a privilege to talk to you.
Huge fan of yours, my friend. Exciting times ahead for the nation. Let's hope we make good decisions.
Before we go, any final thoughts on the election? Any handicapping?
I'll end with a quote. As you know, I'm not a tall guy. I'm like 5'5" on a really good day. So therefore, I love to quote Napoleon, because short people have to stick together in this world. Napoleon said, and listen to this, Napoleon said, a leader is a dealer in hope. A leader is a dealer in hope. Not in fear, not in anger. A leader is a dealer in hope. My message is, be that kind of leader. Be that kind of citizen.
Well said. The Restless Wave, James Stavridis. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, Donny.
Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.